The sad reality is that a lot of UK businesses fail in their first few years of trading. And often this isn't down to one single event. Often this is due to a multitude of factors that then come together and ultimately the company fails. In today's video, what we're going to look at are those 5 what we call silent killers of a business. The things that if you don't track them can creep up on you, catch you out, and in the worst case can cost you your business. So let's start. First thing is no cash flow visibility. This is quite a common one. People are effectively flying blind with their cash flow. What we always suggest to companies do is have a cash flow forecast in place. And this really starts with the basics. How much money is in your bank account? And from that point then, you're looking out to the future to say, okay, what money have we got coming into the business and what money have we got going out of the business? And then that starts to form the basis of that forecast. So you're thinking about, what are my big expenses that are going to come up? When am I going to need to pay for those? When are people going to pay me? And also think about, what happens if that payment gets delayed? So what you're looking at then is a live cash flow forecast. But you do have to stay on top of it. It changes almost daily for most businesses. So you do need a system that you can update quickly and frequently. And there are systems available that can help you with that, but it does need to be done frequently. If you don't do it frequently, the cash flow forecast will soon become outdated. And then as a tool to actually manage your finances is then going to become much weaker. Second area is when a business relies on one client or one revenue stream or very few clients or very few revenue streams. So effectively they've got all their eggs in one basket. And then something happens, perhaps that client takes their business elsewhere and all of a sudden, you've got a gap and you've got to try and fill and potentially fill in a hurry. And this is quite hard to mitigate. It does, for some businesses, they are reliant, it's just the nature of the business, they are reliant on a few number of customers or clients. If that is your case, and that is your scenario, then one of your priorities should be to try and diversify that customer base. How can you look for other avenues, other channels, other customers to try and mitigate and spread some of that risk? And therefore, if the worst does happen and you lose one of those bigger clients, you potentially got another one in reserve that can potentially plug that gap. The next area is not understanding your margins or not monitoring your margins. We're always surprised about how many directors and business owners don't really understand their margins. If you turn around to them and say, what is your gross margin? What is your net margin? We often get sort of blank looks. People might have a sort of vague idea, but they don't really understand. And they also don't really understand how it's trending. Is your margin improving or is that margin declining? So real important area is to really understand your margins, and to be able to do that effectively, you need to understand what your cost base is, how much things are costing you, and also what your sales are. And therefore, from those sort of positions, you can then start building out what your margin looks like. You can then also take that one step further to say, this is what the current margin is, but then this is what our aspirational margin is. So how can we improve that margin? That might be a measure of potentially increasing prices, reducing your input costs to try and improve that margin position. But definitely understand what your margins are. The next one is getting the money into your business. So your business will probably be raising invoices to customers and clients. But what we often see is that the credit control, actually getting the money paid, can be quite relaxed in some business. And obviously cash is the lifeblood of a business. And if that cash doesn't come in, then potentially you've got a problem, because your cash flow is then going to get restricted, and then your ability to meet payments will also be restricted. So keeping on top of your debtors is really important. So we'd always recommend that firms have a formal credit control process. In some firms that might be a friendly reminder. Once invoices have been raised, a friendly reminder goes out reminding the customer when the payment is due. And then as that payment due date approaches, they send further reminders, just keeping in touch with them, very friendly, keeping it light touch, but just reminding them that payment is due. And then on the due date, they send another reminder saying the payment is now due. And then as that due date passes, those reminders, the language of those reminders starts to step up a little bit, and you start to sort of be a little bit more authoritative, assertive in terms of reminding the customer or client of their obligations and reminding them that the payment date is now passed and they need to make payment. And also, as things progress, if that debt still hasn't been paid, Don't be afraid of, think about the relationship and obviously take the relationship seriously, but also think about, the fact that it's not you that have impacted the relationship, it's your customer on the basis that they haven't paid you. So, people often feel, well, they're too polite, they don't want to cause, offence by chasing invoices, and some people just don't like talking about money with customers and clients. But if that invoice hasn't been paid, you potentially delivered the work, you haven't been paid, you're perfectly within your rights, to be quite forthright in asking for that payment. So make sure you're staying on top of credit control and chasing your debtors. And the last point is, just not reviewing the numbers regularly. Just make sure that you are looking at management accounts, looking at your figures and understanding those figures. So if there are problems in your business, if losses are creeping in, perhaps costs are going up, and that's very common in this day and age. We're seeing a very common scenario that we're seeing is that potentially sales are going up, but costs are going up more. Perhaps your sales are going up by 5%, but your costs are going up by 7-8%. So in your mind, you might be doing well, sales are going up, but the reality for the business is it's going backwards. The profitability is going backwards, simply because we're living in an age where costs are potentially going up, for a variety of reasons, inflation and all that sort of good stuff, and therefore revenues and incomes have potentially got to go up by more to keep ahead of those increasing costs. And if you're not looking at your finances, if you're not checking in and understanding what's going on, potentially with your profit and loss accounts, those things can creep up on you, and all of a sudden where you think you were making money or we were making margin, we were making profits, you're actually not, because your cost base has crept up and it's now outweighing the increases that you're seeing in your sales, and therefore your margin is potentially declining. In some cases that decline isn't addressed, then it will become negative, and then you're into a loss-making situation, which obviously then has implications for the business down the line, because then you're looking at things like solvency of your business and making sure that you can carry on trading within your business. So those are 5 areas which have hopefully been useful. If they have, please like and subscribe to our channel.